Dante. This presentation that I'm about to do is basically about the importance of our native language. And right now, at this time, I'd like to share with everybody who is listening a little perspective about who we are as people in our minds, in our way of life, about the importance of our language. Basically, we want to first of all explain that language defines who we are as a nation. It defines who we are as a civilization. It defines who we are even amongst our family, our roles as possibly a father, as well as a mother, as a child, as a brother, or as a sister, our sisters. That's how importance is basically explained in this presentation. First of all, the uniqueness of our language explains who we are as a people and where we fit in this land, where us, all our people, are part of all the elements of the world, and the land, and the fire, and the wind, and the water, represented by our rivers. We are all part of that. Every one of us has great importance to be part of this system. It defines, it explains to others who we are in relationship to not only other people, but also where we are at in this world and where we basically thrive, where we exist as people. The importance of language provides the uniqueness of who we are as a people. As we explain ourselves in the Western world, without this language, especially if defined not only by our nations, but as well as the Western people, it is the utmost importance that our language is basically a main part of our governance, of who we are, our future, the sustainability of our culture as a people through our stories, through our history, through our knowledge, through our worldview that will help us perpetuate and carry on into the future as we go on. And basically, that is the importance of language. As I've explained the importance of language, it is only a small part of the idea that I would like to share with everybody to grasp, to remember, to hold on to carry on. And one of the small parts of the importance of language is how we teach this to not only our people, but to some of the young ones that are coming up. We have to consider some of the methods of how we teach. We want to remember of how we learned, how we have been showed, how we have acquired knowledge from not only from maybe our fathers and mothers, also from our older brothers, our older females. This is basically something that we reflect of back in time of what we know, which was helpful to us enabling us to learn, to acquire knowledge. And basically, the first step that is important in terms of learning is the ability to listen. Ability to listen or to observe are basically the whole keys to take in a direction of acquiring any type of knowledge, whether it's language, culture, whether it's task, whether it's craft work. So basically what I'm leading into is the complements of the Plains Indian Sign Language in a means to where it complements basically our learning of our languages and our cultures, which also will be complementing a worldview as we begin to participate and feel involved, as well as being basically having some ownership in the experience will give us a more inspiring, a more empowering, a more interactive way to feel that we're part of this system. And at this time, I would like to first of all to say, again, just on reflection of what I said earlier about the key to learning is to be able to listen as well as observe. When you observe, you see basically nature. Nature is a series of very dynamic, very mystical, awesome, powerful experience of patterns. And so when we observe these patterns, they are natural just as much as the change of seasons. From where we start, where the grass is low in the spring, that basically for some native people, that's a new year, to where the grass is tall in the summer, to where the leaves are falling from the trees in the fall, and the cycle of where it's winter and where we stay warm and the snows come down. That is a pattern that we see in nature. So what we have to realize is that our experience in acquiring any knowledge is to look for the patterns or hear the patterns of what was going on. Like, for example, if a person was to get up in the morning when the sun comes up, the first thing that they observe or they hear is people preparing for the day, whether they're preparing some bread, whether they're cooking up some food that we're going to eat, or whether they're making some kind of nectar or some kind of juices, or they're making some kind of cereal that we eat, that we put it within some milk in there. Those observations, those sounds, as a person, we begin to see that they are patterns. That a pattern for a human being is when they wake up and what they hear, what they see is a pattern. As they go to school, they understand patterns of time. We understand patterns of when the bus comes in. Who comes on time, who comes in a little late, who comes in with everybody. That is another observation we have in terms of learning. So we see that as birds, as the animals work too. We see how the buffalo, when they come together, we see a pattern of that. In the warmer days, they not only gather in bunches and dust up some of the soil so they can keep cool. That is an observation. That is something we could hear them buffalo doing. We could also see that when they gather in a colder weather, they are coming together to keep warm. When we see birds doing the same activity of flocking together, we know that there's a change of season. We know that when we see the activities of some farm animals, some of our stock, let's say it's our horses, we see these horses getting kind of antsy. What they sometimes, that we don't know, they know way ahead of time. And what I'm about to explain in terms of learning is that They know that there are some clouds coming from a direction where a possible storm may be coming, where cold weather is coming. So they're preparing, moving their blood around so that their blood is moving around to the proper balance of the atmosphere, the proper balance of what they sense in the wind, especially the cold, and what they sense that they need to generate their metabolism to compensate for them changes. Only in a scientific way will somebody explain that. But as Native people, we understand that basically life is a series of patterns. And as a learner, we observe that and we hear that. And we use that to tie in how we learn our languages. That is the importance of language and where it is part of our universe. So when we look for patterns in our language, and we see patterns, just like we learn songs. We learn songs by patterns. What are the patterns? Hey wa baby I want to kawagu yana hawi ne ne. Hey wa baby I want to kawagu yana hawi ne ne. Hey wa baby I want to kawagu yana hawi hey yana hey ne owe. 3 chants, and each of them have a pattern. And how our elders, the ones that loved us, the ones that wanted to teach us, the ones that wanted to show us, they say that these songs, they came from the wind. These songs came from the water. And when you follow the patterns of the water and the wind, you will see that you're imitating. Just like how we learn to walk, we imitate. How we learn to talk, we imitate. How we learn to speak, we imitate. How we maintain our attitude, we imitate. And those are patterns that we are looking for naturally, and we're listening to naturally of how we acquire knowledge. So then when we do this learning through patterns, we emulate, like how the wind shows us songs, how the water shows us songs. Akbara dear, dish but you will go. Hey newa baby I want to kawagu yana hawi hey yana hey ne owe. So the winds, they aren't linear, they're cyclical. The waters and the currents, they say that it moves all the time. Chagalawe in the Crow language is something that has no form. And so we imitate those patterns that we see with the wind, in the water, and even in the fire as it's moving and it's dancing. And when we're singing, we have that rhythm. And being on earth is the comforting place that holds us up. As we go along in learning knowledge, grasping ideas, getting information, exchanging what we think, what we feel, and what we see, what we hear, we come across our own basically our own movements, how we move around, how we duck, how we walk quietly, how we communicate with each other, how we emphasize with gestures. This is the origin of the Plains Indian Sign Language. The Plains Indian Sign Language goes back many years back, and it came forward. And it is still here today. And it is there for us to basically wake up. It's there for us to use again, so that we exchange knowledge, we can teach each other. So we can see patterns, just like the movements, the gestures, because our native way, it's about life. Life, then one of the greatest treasures that we can be given by that Almighty, or the Creator. This earth, this spiritual place that we're on, gave us all of these patterns to observe, to listen to. And that's what this sign language had originated from. It was at one time the primary language for many tribes, many native people to communicate. They used it in means of not only for prayer, but to be able to speak to each other. Like, for example, they would say, like, for example, how are you? That was a greeting. Danse, or Shodaji, how are things? They are good. And how about you? Oh, I'm just going with the flow today. Bago Marejik. So these were the ways that we communicated, because we're about life. Prior to the point of where we had suffered all of the colonialistic indoctrination, as well as the historic trauma, our people were active, our people were moving. Our people did not have to shy away from abuse, from people that taught in the boarding schools, that were using discipline, that were using anger, that were using vengeance to hurt somebody, to do something aggressive, to say things that are mean and cruel. And that is the history that we have to overcome, because before that, our people were jovial and moving around, and there were times when they had to refrain from that, because in the presence of medicine, in the presence of a medicine bundle, let's say a pipe, they had the knowledge and the conduct to observe. When there was a ceremony of a pipe ceremony, they were taught that they have to be still. They have to hold still, they have to sit. And then they couldn't talk, because the elders, the ones that are in charge, the ones who are in charge, had a responsibility. And they observed that, and they understood that it wasn't a time to be jovial and be overt and being I guess, in a more dynamic setting. Previous to that, our people had that quality, but not until they put them in dormitories. They tied them up, they beat them, they washed their mouth out with soap, so they couldn't do anything. If they spoke their language, it would have to be a whisper. If they were able to communicate, they had to subtly use their hands. And it wasn't like a way where there was openness, where there was a time where they could say, "Oh, how are you? It's good to see you. Come on over this way. Why don't you sit here and we'll talk a little bit. I remember that time when I seen you. It was a long time ago. During that time, we were eating a lot of buffalo at that hunt. You were there. There were 3 of you. Remember that?" And they say, "Yeah. Well, we got some berries over there. We made a stew with it. So come on, join us. We'll sit. Maybe later we'll take that tobacco. And we'll share something. Or let's go out there. I know where there's some elk over there. Let's go over there, and then we'll get some, and then we'll eat, and we'll pray." And that's the kind of a movement that people had in those times, where they didn't have to worry about some of those mean priests, those different types of denominations that come in with the mentality of the Magna Charta, or some of those types of documents, manifest destiny, that they thought gives them the right to kill people, to slaughter them, to think that they're better than them, and to annihilate them and create some kind of genocidal type of practice, to where They wanted to own what they have and turn it into capital gain. That goes back. So at that time, why I'm saying this, back to the most purest form of communication, our sign language was the way how we communicated with each other. And it was a natural gesture. So as people went along, somewhere along the line, if they seen somebody saying, they knew, little kids knew, they would pick up that sign and say, They knew that they meant yes. And then as people going along, if there was something that was in the negative context, that was not necessarily defiant, but maybe it was not quite right, Namoya, and then a child would observe that, hear that, and also they would also copy it, so that in their mind, they're beginning to see what Namoya meant in this whole universe, in the wind that carries this voice, in the observation of nature, of how they see something that is good, something that is bad. Miwa sin, when you begin to use that, there are different dynamics that kids and people begin to see how they could casually say it, to where they say it to somebody, or they think about what it means, to where they add more to it. But all in all, they had several different ways of saying a native word like miwa sin. They could say it in terms of miwa sin dynamically, casually, miwa sin, miwa sin. So these concepts, again, are patterns that we have to understand. And as we acquire them, we want to be in sync with the universe, with the wind, with this land, with the fire, and even with the water that we emulate, because it has no form. And we be like the water, we be like the wind. So that's how this plain sign language kind of begin, as humans begin creating communication means. And it began to where some people intermingled, and they could see that some of the motions were the same. Some of the motions that they had, like for example, some of the people in other parts of the world, like in southern plains of the Kiowa, the Comanche, the Oto, the Pawnee, these people also had these same gestures. And our people from the north, the Dakota, the Crow, the Hidatsa, the Cree, the Siksika, they come together and they realize that we have a language, even from the west, where we have the Kootenai, where we have people from the Nez Perce, all these people from the east, as well as the Chippewa, and the Crees of all northern parts coming together, that we were able to communicate with each other by these gestures, because they are understood as we see patterns in our gestures and our movements, to a point where it becomes formal, that we could understand that that movement meant yes, that movement meant no. So it was the most practical language that naturally evolved from our physical being. It is used, and it was used at times of when we traded. Like for example, this presentation is being recorded at the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara Interpretative Center in Newtown, North Dakota, in the Four Bears segment. And today, Ishtacheduplichish and myself are here to visit our relatives and to hang out. But the thing about it, this place was the center of commerce at one time. People came from all over to share, to bring their wares, whether it's horses, whether it's knives, whether it's guns, whether it's utensils. Maybe it was a spoon, maybe it was digging instruments, maybe it was ammunition, maybe it was black powder, maybe it was paints, maybe it was beads, maybe it was needles, maybe it was awls, maybe it was all types of things that we could trade. Even it would be buffalo hides, deer hides. We traded blankets. Maybe they were striped like that Hudson Bay blanket. Maybe there were shawls that were designed at that time. Maybe there were fish that they were trading. Maybe they had boats that they were trading so that they could navigate this huge river. At that time, they came after like squash. They came after some of the beans, some of the berries, all kinds of different berries, buffalo berries, June berries, elderberries, wild strawberries, grapes. All of this was in our territory before the change of economics, where they wiped out the buffalo, where they plowed up these fields where these natural nutritious plants were like those berries that have high oxidant qualities to keep us well preserved. They eliminated some of the juniper that was part of our prevention medicines. They eliminated a lot of things that at some time where the buffalo roamed in this country. Even this morning, my son and I, Harry Sitting Bear, we were talking about how a person had to stand on their horse because the grass was almost 10 feet tall. And it was a point where he was describing that his older brothers used to ride horses, and that grass, that prairie grass where all the buffalo roamed, was as high as a horse. And it was high as the saddle, and they went through that. And that was before this agriculture. So these were patterns that I'm still getting at, but it's still a discussion basically about language, Plains Indian Sign Language, and it was the means of how we communicate. Okay, the Plains Indian Sign Language is, just like I said, another complement to how we observe, how we listen, how we learn. It's basically natural, and that's the point I'm getting at, that we are about knowledge, information, and acquiring. It's about also technology, because as we went along in life, we begin to emulate new movements that we'd have to introduce. For example, for the camera, in more historic times, the camera or the screen basically was something that we could say that it basically stamped our image on something. And we had to basically create something so that people understood what a camera was. For example, another one is that the emulation and the observation of a pattern of a car wasn't something that 100 years ago was part of the, basically maybe 150 years ago wasn't part of the everyday conversation. So as natives proceeded to thrive in this world, they began to realize that steering was basically what was happening to a vehicle that went by itself. And that was basically a motion that you could understand that was basically driving, or a car. So that it evolved, just like technology evolves, that we can create these signs. Like, for example, if we had that computer screen and we did that, basically a child would understand we're doing the emulation of a computer. Another thing that we're going to do is, like, for example, if we were going to basically cook something, we're not particularly using the fire, but we have something like that is almost geometric, and inside there it has a fire in there that would kind of basically give us the idea that we have an oven. So these are some of the things that basically we can develop in terms. But why I say that now, coming back purely to a basic observation, is that there are methods that in the field of education called immersion, Montessori, total physical response, and master apprentice. They are all based on basically imitation and emulation. And so we have a natural motion that stems or is the foundation of how sign language is. We have this, first of all, we have the first word that we might share with, and I introduced it earlier, is the word for yes. So for somebody who's at a ground zero level, at this time, people that don't know the language are insecure. They're scared because somebody didn't share that with them. They're scared, and sometimes they're angry, and sometimes they're resentful because somebody didn't show them something. Or maybe they're unhealthy because of that. They're not in balance. They're just a little bit off kilter. So what we're going to do is introduce to them a way to help them to gradually acquire some aspects of who they are that define what I earlier stated about the importance of language. And that's who they are. And to have a place, to belong to an entity, to belong to a family, to belong to a clan, to belong to a tribe, to belong to a family, and to have children. These are types of concepts that were healthy to us, that we want to share, that will be healthy for somebody else. So then we come back to the simplicity of repetition, the simplicity of imitating. So when I introduce a word, we start with yes. We go, yes. And then when somebody sees that this word or this motion means yes, we then introduce the native word for that motion. And in this case, we're going to use uh-huh. And remember that we want to make it user-friendly. We want it to make a place where we're comfortable. Mistakes are okay. If we said it wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. That's just how we heard it. But as we hear it more, we're going to gradually fall into place and let that language take us, because it is a more powerful essence. The culture and the spirit of our people are more powerful than our little mistakes. But because it's a loving culture, because it's supernatural, it will take us along and take care of us as a child. Take care of us as you take care of your children, as how you love them. And it'll take you and provide to you the correctness of how something could be said. So we could say, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. So in that, you begin to have different dynamics of how you say yes, but the basic is just yes, uh-huh. Somebody begins to feel those new muscles, that new breath of air of how they can say yes. Before, when they said yes, yes, or they say yeah, uh-huh. Before, they had different ways of saying yes, but when you introduce a one that they're not familiar, there's some muscles in there, and there's basically some nerves in there and blood vessels that have to connect to bring that word and bring it into the brain and like a stamp that you're comfortable with it. Uh-huh. And then we introduce the next word, namoya, meaning no. Namoya, again, you got to think that there are some new things going on in here for somebody who hadn't learned the language. They have insecurity, they're ready to run, they don't want to be corrected. They've been corrected too much, they've been discouraged too much, they're in fear. We want to make this place this place where they're sitting amongst some people where they belong. This is where they're at. This is where they should be. This is where they're going to be. This is going to help them. This is going to carry them on to have a way of life. That was the importance of this language, as I was saying earlier. So then that's why you want to make this environment a good place. It is a place where we want to be. So you want to let people know what Namoya means, and it means no, but you also want to let them practice saying it to where they feel comfortable, because there's some new fine little tuning muscles in there that hadn't acknowledged that movement or put their breath in sync with the wind and this atmosphere and this world and this this supernatural place we're on earth, to where they are part of it. And we want it to be a friendly and happy place, a comforting place, because when you teach the way you were taught in a good way, this is the way you want to teach new learners. So we got 2 words now. Namoya. So they got 2 words. So then we want to start with the 3rd one. Miwa-sen. And again, it could be really overt. It could be really dynamic. It could be casual. It could be just straightforward. But as people go along, like I said earlier, they're going to observe that you could say it emphatically in a way that it's non-threatening. You could say it in a way that it's quiet and respectful. And so that's how our people begin to learn the dynamics of language. So then that word that we're introducing to them is this movement, Miwa-sen, Miwa-sen, Miwa-sen. And as people learn, they begin to say it. And then you have them look at each other, and they look at each other, because when they look at each other, they're actually saying their native tongue, their native word, and in some way they are speaking to them, and they're receiving that knowledge, an experience that before they never had before, because they're starting out at ground zero and they're just beginning to crawl. So then they get some confidence, and you want to nurture that confidence. You want to keep it going, even with its humor, and you don't want to correct them. But if you're going to correct them, you might look in the sky and pretend like you're talking to the air, which is a supernatural place that in turn that air will just bring some good sound to that person, to where they finally correct it. They finally realize that that's what they're saying, because they begin to see patterns. They observe patterns, and they hear them, and finally they catch on. So so far we got 4 of them. Namoya, Miwa-sen, Maya-tan. Istump. Come here. Istump. 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 And so they look around. They begin to hear it, but we ask them on the 4th try, look at somebody, and they'll begin to feel that sense that they are communicating. Istump. 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 So that's how the sign language complements the language, because it's dynamic and interrelated and natural. So then we might go on to another one. So we got Namoya, Miwa-sen, Maya-tan, Istump, Nya. Cool. And then we go back, and then we read Ya. Ya. Okay, let's review, students. Namoya, Miwa-sen, Maya-tan, Istump, Ya. And then we got 6, and then we keep building. Within that small time frame, we were able to introduce 6 words within about 5-10 minutes. We could build on this every day, And then we'll go to another level at some point and while we're teaching, to start teaching basic communications of how are you? I'm good. How about you? I'm just chilling. But that's a little bit of ways away. All I'm doing at this point in time is utilizing sign language as a mean to acquire vocabulary, and on another level, on a preceding level of reinforcement, another level of language acquisition, we utilize it as a means to communicate, as a means to begin to speak our language in a very short amount of time, because the hand gestures are natural and they come to us because we're always talking with our hands anyway, and it's also a form of learning while doing, which is the main quality of Montessori, learning while doing, which is the main quality of immersion, learning while doing, which is one of the main qualities of master apprentice, learning while doing, which is basically total physical response. And physical is basically right in there, and our hand gestures are the physical part of our learning. Okay, at this time, there is some information that I want to share with people, especially tribal people, people that have official programs, official lodges of where they are doing these types of initiatives regarding their language, regarding their culture, who they are, regarding who they are in terms of governance, of defining who they are. And basically, what I'd like to introduce at this point of our discussion is the need to plan. Basically, the need to plan is just like any strategic or maybe tactful or diplomatic way to set some goals to where you want to go. So basically, a lot of times people can get caught up into focusing on, yes, there's a need to for a language, but there's also the need for us to have a plan of our language, of where we're going to use it, how we're going to use it, and where we imagine where it will be in the ever-changing aspect of not only nature, but also the world that we function in. So basically, we have to use some of the qualities of the Western world that is helpful, especially when we have to think about sustainability as well as teaching. We need these resources to thrive. We need basically these plans to define to people who we are and to where we're going and what we're going to do and how we're going to get there. So that's the importance of this aspect that I'm going to casually bring to the attention of many of our listeners. And at some point in time, our listeners not only being teachers, but also students, but also administrators, we have to find a way to keep our organizations functioning, thriving, as well as being self-sustaining. So that's why I'm introducing the concepts of the relevance of creating a strategic plan. And what a strategic plan basically is like, for example, where you want to go. Years ago, among our people, when we had to hunt buffalo, we had to have some kind of plan to how we were going to do that. We had to look at the environment, the terrain of what we had to deal with, some of the weather that is changing all the time. We had to acknowledge that maybe basically some of our enemy could be there. Maybe we may be at a point where they could take advantage of us. We had to look at the terrain and the availability of water, the availability of firewood, the availability of different plants that supplement some of the venues of our diets to complement our buffalo hunting. And areas of where we had to have medicine for some of our people. And it took basically a whole dynamic peripheral of things, of not just things, but motions, of plants, of water, of ceremony, of the wind, or basically the weather, and people, and rocks, and tools, and advantages, shelters. These are some of the things that we had to put together just for a small buffalo hunt. We also had to plan them even like for against months ahead of time. Even when it come to war, we had a strategy of what are our contingencies. If this is what we want to do, this is one of our outcomes. But if for some reason something changes to that outcome and it becomes difficult, we have other options that we can utilize, and that way we want to utilize some of these contingencies as a means for victory. And we always had planning. So when we did these, we basically started out with a ceremony. And our hunting was an important formal institution. When we went on, if there were battles, they were formal initiatives to acquire hunting grounds, to defend our territory, to acquire bounty from our enemy, because they intruded. And our law, if you intrude in our law, just like the Western world, they've trespassed, they have to pay a penalty, and we may take their horses. Maybe we might take other aspects of their culture, and they become immersed into ours. Whether it's women and children who have survived battle, we take them in and endear them to become our nation, our civilization, and treat them well too, to where that maybe at one day they return to their people, or they decide to stay. Or also they bring in talents, or they bring in genetics to avoid our people from mutation. So what I'm getting at is, again, the necessity of planning. We have to understand that when we have our pipe ceremonies, we're making imagery of where we want to be, where it's better. Where we want to be, where we feel good and our families are taken care of, where our people are taken care of by the Creator, and where they're safe, and that there's no harm, and that they travel good, and that they get some kind of talent, some kind of idea, some kind of song, some kind of words, something that comes out of nature to carry on in a good way, to where that it's helpful to the people and carry them forward into the days ahead, like a medicine. Maybe an eagle taking somebody, adopting them as their child and getting the power of that eagle, or that bear, or that deer, or even some of the life forms in the ground and even in the water. That's where we got this knowledge, this medicine, our songs, our ideas, our patterns. This is who we are. So at that point, what I'm getting at is that we have to adapt some of the good stuff that comes out of the powerful stuff that comes out of Western civilization, like strategic planning, because we also have a vision of where we want to be, and that's what that is. And we also, in a strategic plan, we have a mission, and that's who we are, and we have to let people know who we are. That's why I discussed the importance of language. And then we also have goals. These are the activities we want to do to maintain, present, create a renaissance, to revitalize, to restructure, to relearn our language, our culture, and our worldview. This is what we want to do. And then we have objectives. This is how we're going to do it. Here are the activities. We're going to use the sign language to teach vocabulary. Then we're going to use maybe master apprentice to start teaching people to speak. We're going to take these people that we learned how to speak to become ones that learn how to teach. We're going to get these ones that learn how to teach with the people that organize them to create a school based on their culture. And then from there, maybe about from 10 to 12 years, we're going to use the funds that the government sets aside for building homes, and we're going to build a structure not only where our school is, but we're going to have a residential area, possibly a community of houses where everybody speaks that language, and the kids are playing there, and there's a place to where they can practice that worldview, where the elders can come together. That is basically a plan for sustainability. And we got to find ways to finance those. And then in order to do that, we also have to assess our people, because sometimes when we apply for these grants, when we apply and seek assistance, not only from our own people, but from outside philanthropy areas, we have to prove a need. And the basic way that a lot of Western people think is through quantitative means. They want numbers. So we do surveys, basically, to see who's interested, where they learn the best. Do they need transportation? Do they lack food? Well, what are some of the things that are hampering their learning? Do they need child care? Do they need a babysitter? Do they need basically some books? Do they need a computer? We find these out in assessments, and when we document these needs to these government agencies that have funds, they want to know in a Western way, in a deductive way, in a scientific way, based on numbers that we can create in assessments, in pie charts, in graphs, and percentages, that the importance of this need is right here. People need transportation, so when we acquire these funds, we show them these assessments to say, hey, our people are willing to learn, but there's about this much money we need to get them to point A to point B. And that's how we utilize assessments. At this time, I'm going to basically look forward to the next presentation that we have, and at this point in time, I'm going to wrap up this presentation, and I want to thank you for your time. I want to reflect on some of the discussion that I had. Basically, it was the importance of language. Number two, I discussed the elements of how our language is acquired through patterns, observing as well as listening. We also have Plains Indian Sign Language that's based on natural cycles of our human movement. I went back to where it was the key language, and it was a naturalistic language that was basically, we see not only in our human way of life, but we also see it in the animals. Then I also discussed that basically how we could utilize Plains Indian Sign Language in teaching vocabulary, in also as a fundamental protocol of using that technique to complement other current means of language acquisition. And then I concluded basically regarding mainstream needs that we need to adapt to take our languages into the future. Karagosh.